here to give you a bit more information about bowerbirds as the sort of master architects and builders of the bird world, but also to give you a bit more of an insight into the fascinating lives that these birds lead. Hang on, sorry, some issues with, brilliant. Okay, so first of all, what are bowerbirds? So there's around 22 species of bowerbirds. This might sound like I'm being a bit vague on the exact number, and that's just because in the last few months there's been some changes in our understanding of how many species there are and how they're related to each other. So on the screen here, we've got 14 photos of different bowerbird species. And as you can see, they all sort of have the same basic body form, so that you can sort of tell that they're all related to each other. And they range in colour from these sort of mottled browns and creams on the left-hand side here, through to these sort of much more brighter colours on the right-hand side. And they vary in size from about a large blackbird to a small jackdaw. And this photo here is of a spotted bowerbird that we've just ringed. So he's got some fancy little coloured leg rings on so that we can identify this male. But this is being held in the hand of a male ringer. So just to give you an idea of what sort of size they are, if you don't know how big sort of blackbirds and jackdaws are in the hand. And so these birds are found only in Australia, which is shown in blue on the map here, and New Guinea, which is shown in yellow. And in general, we know far more about Australian bowerbirds, and that's simply due to the population and urbanisation of Australia. And bowerbirds in New Guinea are found in much more remote areas that are more challenging to access. So we just don't know quite as much about those species. And they predominantly occupy rainforest habitats, so seen on the left here. But a few species have adapted to the sort of considerably drier savanna habitats in monsoonal and arid Australia. So this is a photo of one of my field sites in Queensland in Northern Australia. And in Australia, a handful of species are also present in more urban environments as well. So this is a car park at James Cook University in Cairns in Queensland. And you can't really see it on this photo here so well because bowers are brown and it's under a tree and dappled light, but there's actually a bower under here. And there's a lot of bowers that can be found in sort of more urban environments. But the thing that these birds are obviously most well known for, and the reason why we're here today, is because they build these fabulous structures that are called, unsurprisingly, bowers, hence the name bowerbird. And there's quite a bit of variation in bower style and decoration, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But generally, they all consist of some form of structure made of sticks, twigs, or grass, or some other kind of vegetation. And then they decorate it with coloured objects that they place around it. And you can identify different species of bowerbird by the bower that they build. So all of the members of the same species will build the same type of bower and use generally the same sort of colour palette when they're decorating. So you might be familiar with this bower here, which is of the satin bowerbird, which is found down in southern Australia. And these males all build bowers that are these two parallel stick walls, and then they've got this sort of crazy carpet of blue things out the front. Whereas here you can see this is much more hut-like bower, and this has got piles of very distinct piles of different coloured objects dotted around the bower. And just to say that for most of the photos throughout this talk, I've given the name of the species of bowerbird in the box here. So I didn't write bowerbird after every one, but it's like the Boglecop bowerbird, the McGregor's bowerbird, the toothbill bowerbird. So they're all called something bowerbird, which gets a bit tiring when you're giving a talk about bowers and bowerbirds. I'm going to be saying bower a lot. And if you only take one thing away from today, I'd like it to be the fact that bowers aren't actually nests. So it's a really common misconception that they are, because they look relatively similar and perhaps similar skills might be involved in construction. But nests are built by either males or females or both sexes, and these are used to incubate eggs, whereas bowers are only built by male bowerbirds, and they have one simple function, which is to persuade females to mate with the owner. So the female gets no material benefit from her mate at all. So she doesn't get any resources like food or a nest or any care for the nestlings. The only thing that the male contributes to his future offspring is his genetic material. And so the only way that a male can impress females is using his bower. And so they've evolved these ever more elaborate ways of impressing females. And a male can mate with more than one female during the breeding season as well. So he can potentially father a lot of offspring if his bower is the most attractive one in the area. And so perhaps unsurprisingly, they put a lot of work into trying to appear attractive to females. So building and maintaining these bowers is a lot of effort because they have to rebuild them every single year. And then they maintain them during the breeding season, which is about 4 months. So in this photo here, this is the active bower of a great bowerbird. And just in the foreground here, you can see sort of a pile of scruffy sticks, and this will have been a previous year's bower. And then just here as well, this is one that's a few years before. And so each male that holds a territory builds one bower within that territory each year, and they're often near his previous bowers, as you can see here. This is a bit of an extreme example. Often they're not quite this close to each other. And the reason that they do that is so that females know where to find them year after year, so that if you're a particularly attractive males, then females will know where to come and find you in the following year so that they can mate with you again if they'd like. And learning how to build and decorate these bowers in the first place is also quite a time-consuming activity. So males learn how to build these before they become sexually mature, which is around 7 years old. So we think they can spend as many as 7 years learning how to build these bowers. And so here are 2 bowers of the spotted bowerbird. And this one on the left here is one that's been made by a group of immature males. So you can see that they've got sort of the basic shape right. And there's a few green decorations on the side here. But if you compare it to the bower of a mature male, you can see, they've not used the right material. They're missing the piles of snail shells at either end here, and they don't have all the green objects in the middle. And so during this learning process, what immature males do is, as well as build these sort of practice bowers on their own in groups, is they also associate themselves with one particular bower-owning male, and they'll almost serve an apprenticeship at his bower. So they help that male to maintain and decorate his bower, and they will also practice their displays around the bower. So this is a great bowerbird bower. And these are 3 immature males all displaying around it. So this one in the middle here is playing the role of the female. This one here is playing the role of the bower-owning male and displaying to this female. And I'm not really quite sure what this one here is doing. I think he's like supervising or watching, I don't really know. But all of these males will take it in turns to take on these different roles and practice their displays, so that they can learn how to produce both the physical displays in terms of behaviour and also building the bowers themselves. And so we've seen that bower decorations can vary across species, but bowers are also decorated differently within a species depending on what's available in the local environment. So here, going back to great bowerbirds again, so here are 2 great bowerbird bowers, and on the left here is one that's in the country. So this is one at my field site, which is on a cattle farm. And you can see here that only human-made objects really are this plastic lid, and there's a few pieces of broken green glass, but all of these other objects are natural. And if you contrast this to a bower that we see in town, so this is a bower from, ironically, a place called Townsville, which is about 300 kilometers away from my field site. And here we see way more man-made, human-made objects on the bower. So We've got some hair ties here, quite a lot of glass, some bits of wire, and there's even a little kid's bubble wand as well. And so individuals can be really flexible in terms of what they use to decorate, but these decorations are normally really highly contrasting with the visual background, and we think this is so that these decorations are really obvious to the females and it makes the bowers easy to see. And there's also a really rich history of human interactions with bowerbirds, not just in urban areas, but for example, in the Aboriginal culture, bowers are woven into their stories as well. So this is Daryl, an Aboriginal ranger that I work with in Australia. And Aboriginals call great bowerbirds ghost birds. And it's probably because they collect bones for their bower. So it kind of makes them look kind of spooky, I guess. And so just to give you a quick sort of overview of the different types of bowers that birds build. So there's sort of 3 main types. And so the simplest one is this one here, which is made by the tooth-billed bowerbird in Australia. And for this, the male just clears an area of ground that's got at least 1 tree in it. And he places these large leaves all around the area, but they're very specifically upturned so that the lighter side is facing up. And we think this is because this gives higher contrast with the background. So if you go around and turn these over so that they're the wrong way round, as soon as you leave the area, the male will go back in and flip them all round again. And so this is a really basic kind of bower, which obviously you guys don't need to know how to build because there's not really much construction happening there. And so the next type of bower is the maypole bower. And so these are built of orchid stems and sticks and other vegetation that's taken from trees or the forest floor. And these are usually placed around a vertical sapling or tree trunk. And these bowers are all generally variations on this theme. So the golden bowerbird here has 2 of these maypoles. The McGregor's has 1 with this sort of dish around it. And this is the Vogelkop bowerbird, which is more of a hut-like structure, but then there's a central maypole in the middle of the bower that you can't quite see here. And then they often also have a mat of moss or other vegetation that they then decorate with brightly coloured objects. And so the bowers of these maypole building species are quite variable in terms of their architecture and their building materials compared to the other main type of bower, which is avenue bowers. And with these bowers, the fundamental structure is pretty much the same. So it's 2 parallel walls of sticks or grass stems, and they're placed vertically into a foundation of sticks or grasses that have been laid horizontally across. And again, here you can see the different color palette and the locations of the decorations that each species uses. And the 2 species that I've worked on most are the spotted bowerbird over here and the great bowerbird over here, which are quite closely related, which you can pretty much tell because they've got quite similar bower styles as well. And so I just wanted to show you quickly what the displays of these males actually look like, because they're pretty cool, and it gives you an idea of how the males of particular avenue bower building species interact with their bowers. So in the middle here, we have, this is the female who's assessing the male's display, and this is the bower owning male here. And so what the male's doing there is he's picking up and shaking and tossing the coloured decorations that are around the bottom of the entrance to the bower here. So as well as building and decorating bowers, males also have some extra tricks up their sleeves to make themselves more attractive to visiting females. I'm only going to talk about one today, but they do a few things. And so in the great bowerbird, at either end of the bower, there's these really large areas that are cleared, that the males cover with hundreds of sort of grey and white objects, such as stones, snail shells, and bones. And these objects aren't actually laid out randomly. So closer into the bower, the objects are smaller. and further away from the bower, the objects are larger. And so these objects are all actually arranged in a really smooth size distance gradient. And what this does is this actually creates the effects or the environment to create an illusion known as forced perspective. And we actually had Chris Packham come out to our field site a couple of years ago and do some filming. And I really like his explanation of the forced perspective. So I'm just going to play this short video clip. This is from BBC documentary World's Sneakiest Animals.
By taking objects that we know the scale of and playing with perspective, we can trick the mind and make it think that they've magically changed size. It's an illusion we call forced perspective.
Okay, so bowerbirds are basically doing something similar to the situation with the cars here, where the smaller objects are closer to the viewer and the larger objects are further away. And so we think that this confuses the female's depth perception, and so it takes her a while to figure out what's going on. And we're currently also looking into how this illusion affects the size of the decorations that the male displays in front of the illusion as well, because the apparent size of the object is likely to change as he moves it around the court area. And we also know that males that are better at organizing their objects by size are more successful at attracting and mating with females than males that are less skilled at this. So, so females are selecting on this for some reason, but we're not entirely sure what they do find attractive about it at the moment. And so that's where work is going at the moment. And so our work suggests that the quality of illusion that a male builds depends on both the objects that he's got available in his environment, so just like with the coloured decorations, but also his skill at arranging them. So it could well be that this is a way that males can indicate their skill level to females. And we also know how males build these illusions and the behaviours involved, but we still actually know very little about how the bower structure itself is built. And so this is where you come in. So we're starting a project to look at how bowerbirds build their bowers and whether the processes involved are similar to nest building. We were supposed to be going to Australia later on this year to start collecting the data for this. Obviously, COVID has put a stop to that for now. So we thought it would be fun for you to act as basically surrogate bowerbirds to help us start and understand how these birds build these really super fantastic structures. And thanks very much for listening. And if anyone's got any questions, I will do my best to answer them.